So I have spent a lot of time over the last 10 years in online and kind of fringy spaces that pertain to learning. And I think the purpose of my linking in here today is to give a little pushback, if I understand correctly, to maybe some of the messages that you've been hearing at this conference, which is what positions me as a dissident in this particular context. And that pushback comes as we kind of get used to this idea of what we can do with technology. And as learning technologists, as individuals in the classroom, we all have different ways of getting comfortable with this technology. And a lot of what I have seen and what I hear and understand from the research that I do in these technological spaces is that we have some very different purposes in using technology. And a lot of what we're doing with technology, from my perspective, as I look at kind of this broader universe of things moving forward, is that we're using new technologies and new potentials to do the same old thing, or to do things that are really quite primitive or ancient. So, you know, the keyboard as a back scratcher might be a little bit exaggerated, but that's one of the concerns that I have. And it's certainly a concern that I have as a parent, as I look at what these applications are and how technology is being used in our learning environments. I think this pun is for Scott. One of the concerns I have out of this kind of perspective of dissent, and there's actually two. One is when my kids hit the school system, public school system, about 10 years ago. I realized that we have a system that is, in spite of our best efforts in the classroom, and in spite of our ability to look these kids in the eye, we've got this policy system that is really essentially dehumanizing. We've got this extreme standardization, we've got this regime of testing, and it just is not a system of trust. It isn't a system that really asks us who these kids are when they come into our classroom. Certainly we ask, what can we do for our kids? But that puts these kids, when we ask that, kind of in a disempowered position. The idea that we are going to give these kids what they need, rather than find out who these kids are and what it is that they can do, what their interests are, what their strengths are. And in creating this perfect blizzard or this perfect storm, we have at the same time this rise of these really powerful technologies. Now, I am a great lover of technology. I can go on and on about the benefits of Twitter. I have multiple little devices here, even with me today, probably overkill. But my concern is that these devices and the potential of these technologies are being used to exploit specifically those standardized processes and simplistic processes in order to make learning efficient in ways that maybe are not supportive of our kids. So we have a lot of talk about personalized learning, is my understanding this week, in terms of School of One. I think maybe a lot of you have heard that Pearson bought Newton, which is a learning platform. And so we have these ways of scaling learning, of making it efficient, of improving delivery and content and things like that. And my concern is that this is both asking too much and too little of the technologies that we have. Even without these types of systems, we are already colonizing a lot of our kids' time in terms of what they do, whether we have a flipped classroom or not. We take up their time in school, we take up their time out of school. We demand a lot of things from them as opposed to looking at what it is that they personally are interested in doing. And parents are really buying into this as well. You know, this is a very fear-based system. We want an answer. We certainly all would like to know that what is going on in the classroom is going to guarantee our kids' success going forward. And when I look at that from a broader perspective of complexity theory, which is something that I've been working with, I'm very concerned that we aren't really being responsive to what those needs might be and what that type of things going forward would be. Now, when we talk about personalized learning, I consider that something that's kind of the done unto of education policy. It is something that is done unto our children. And the difference that I make or that I draw there is with the idea of personal learning. And personal learning is something that comes from the learner themselves. And it really is an exploration of human potential more than it is an idea of how we direct them. And that is perhaps the core of my decision navigate that idea within our classrooms or within what we're going to conceive as a learning system. Now, my kids spent several years in kind of unusual learning situations. They have both been in public schools throughout their learning career. And one part of their learning was using these algorithmic learning programs, things like you will see in School of One. And here's some things that I can tell you. One is that this is not where they are going to go for their deep interests. This is a superficial type of learning. It is not very flexible for them. It was a way of getting things done, but they already knew when they sat down to these machines that these machines were communicative devices, they were creative devices, and so the idea that they would be engaged just because it got put on a machine lasted for about 5 minutes. And then it was back to the same old issues of motivation and standardization, and how do we overcome that in order to help learners. They also knew that the technology essentially torpedoed itself. In spite of its adaptive nature, and in spite of the ability apparently to tailor its learning, to personalize learning for every single student, it really is relentless. If you don't get something, it keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back. And the only way to escape that type of learning is to walk away from the machine. And that is not something I think that we want our learners to do when they get into these kinds of learning systems. So that was a further concern. And finally, what the kids brought to the table, these algorithmic learning experiences, was the understanding that there are open education resources available to them. And with that, they would actually go outside the system, resourceful enough to go outside the system to gather more information about how to do a particular kind of math, to seek extra kinds of explanations. They would also, of course, seek that with their classmates. They had that flexibility. But if you have an algorithmic program that is tending to learning and requiring people to show up, virtually record their keystrokes, or you're trying to get them to follow the little red, green, yellow lights like School of One does, this is not very exciting for them. And you kind of wonder what's going to happen to the minds that do this. And what they also do based on open education resources was that if they can learn it from the machine now, they can learn it from the machine later when it's probably more relevant to them. And so just because we have this wonderful option for algorithms and this wonderful option for these types of digital learning experience, it doesn't mean that it is actually going to be a very effective learning program. As much as we'd like to think that, we've got it all figured out. My fear when we have these kinds of programs is what we're creating is not differentiated learning, but differentiated robots. So there's a few words of dissent for you. This is a diagram that I particularly like. It's getting pretty a little on the technical end, maybe for a journalism class or a high school journalism class. But I wanted to use it just to show kind of what the area of discussion and how it might differ from what you're traditionally used to hearing in the classroom. In complex adaptive systems, what we're seeing is that if you know what your goals are, and if you know how to achieve them, you know where you want to go, you know how to do it, you're down here in this lower left-hand corner, simple planning control. And as things get a little more vague, and it kind of depends on your worldview. Do you think that you can define what needs to go on going forward, or is this something that you're not so sure? As things get a little more vague, you move back out here. You have things that are technically complicated, like the algorithmic learning. You have socially complicated things, which would include inquiry-based learning. But you still have a situation where you have planned, you have perhaps personalized for your learners. And so even in inquiry-based learning, like if you take understanding by design, it's really reverse engineering. It's you make the decision for the learner, and then you reverse engineer how they get there. It's kind of a creepy treehouse, quite frankly. So the area that I've been working in, so that you understand why this is a movement of dissent, is way out here. And I'd like to say it's out in left field, but it's actually out in the far right, but we'll just go with it. Connective and personal learning. Some of this is based on the theory of connectivism, which is highly debated, and I just wrote a paper myself that kind of gave it a bit of a wandering. But I still believe that these are the areas that are probably most important for our learners going forward. Because it's out there in that field that there are lots of mistakes, there's lots of opportunity, there's lots of uncertainty. uncertainty. And if there's anything that we have learned over the last 10 years by trying to operate in this space, and it's a process of negotiating all the way through these spaces, is that if something goes wrong, it doesn't mean it's bad. It means that, oh, that didn't work. We have to recalculate. We have to revamp. We have to decide how we're going to do something else. It doesn't shame me. It doesn't leave a black mark on my record. It won't keep me from going to college because I got a B in calculus. This is way out there, and it is something that is very, very hard to communicate if all we're talking about is down here and trying to fix this corner. So that's the really big range. Now, what does this look like? Looks like a network. This is my daughter's learning network last year. I sat down with her to put this out. This is a presentation in and of itself. But what I want to point out, two things, is that we have not only technology, but we have community and we have individuals. And none of them were used to drill into this. It was not practice. The technology was there because it was useful to accomplish the goals that she chose to make. And I'm going to provide a couple of examples of what this might look like if you follow it through. What I want to note is that both of my kids have chosen to concentrate in arts fields. And upon reflection, I realized that it's kind of an interesting thing, because while we decry the lack of funding in the arts in the schools, what it has done is left it to be an ignored area. And when it is ignored, be it with funding or just a time and attention, it's a ripe area for innovation and creativity. So they can pursue these types of things without being hectored, without being measured, without having to meet somebody else's goals. And this is the area that they have found to be one, I think, of most freedom. We may have lost a great scientist or sociologist, I don't really know. But the paths to get to those places were so fraught with standards and benchmarks and measures and linear processes that they weren't going to go that way. So we've got these kind of interesting arts experiences. Now what happens when we do this is, do we know if we're doing it right? And I'll tell you what, after 10 years, we still don't know if we're doing it right. How would we ever know? How could we ever determine if things are going well for somebody learning in this type of system? And what we've discovered is that while we can't plan for those types of benchmarks like we would in a normal situation or normal learning, there are blips like on a radar screen. And when we don't expect the blips, we don't quite know where to look for them, but when they occur, we can go, oh, this probably means things are going pretty well. So I want to show you two blips on the radar here. And one you could consider kind of a form of peer assessment, and one you could consider in form of expert assessment. My daughter is a student at Purpich High School for the Arts. Last year, when she walked in for the first year, in her first couple of months, she choreographed a dance to a video that she found online that she thought was particularly intriguing. I don't know if any of you have seen the Syriac videos of morphing animals. The one that she liked was cows with an electronic backbeat with multiple heads and turning into snakes and things like that. And the dance was choreographed, filmed at school at the end of the year, so 8 months later, all of the dancers got a copy of the dance. And about 3 weeks after school was out, her name popped up on her Google alert, because we keep Google alerts on both of the kids' names, just so we know. And one of her classmates, unbeknownst to her, had posted this video online. And by the time we discovered it, it had gone up to some 30,000 views or something like that at that point. The artist, rather than claiming copyright issues, had actually given it a thumbs up, had appreciated the mashup involved in doing this. We still find Google alerts on her name popping up in places like Romania and Turkey. And beyond that, we had kind of an interesting question. Now, a lot of times when you have this kind of recycling of information, there's not a lot of critical analysis. It's just kind of a numbers game, which, that can happen. But one of the dance critics that talked about this looked at this dance and said, is the internet changing the way we dance? causes that kind of question, we probably are doing something that might look like learning. And the other interesting part about throughout all of this discussion and all of this viral video activity, nobody ever mentioned that she was a 14-year-old student. It was not included in the original information. There was never any question about that. And so we look at that as kind of a form and say, you know, something is going on here that has received recognition from peers, and it might be important. So, yeah, the weirdness of the cows. It's available online. Believe me, you can find it in many, many places. A second example I'll give you for my son, Quentin. He's a jazz musician. He's moving to New York with a scholarship next month to study jazz. Jazz, of course, is not a main part of the curriculum in the schools, so again, this is something that he pursued on his own. Like many students, he had his hourly music lessons, things like that, had an experience through McPhail. One of the things that jazz musicians do is, of course, as they get into a performing career, they open a website, or they launch a website. He did that. He uses the website to post his gigs. He uses the website to put up his compositions, videos of his performances, and he also posts transcriptions. And for those of you who may or may not be musicians, transcriptions are the actual writing down of notes. And in the world of jazz, this is particularly interesting because unlike classical music where everything is all written out, jazz has this phase of improvisation where people are making it up in the moment. And in order to understand how these master craftspeople think about jazz, students of jazz will take that piece apart, slow it down, write it down. It reveals how structures work, how they deviate from structures. And so he does these, he vets them, he puts them up online. And about a week after he put one of them up online, and I'm being a little discreet here because this, was technically private correspondence, he got a note through the contact form on his website. Dear Quentin, just wanted to get in touch. Thank you so much for your transcription of my piece. You nailed it. And this little note went on to give him a little piece of jazz history that I don't think a lot of people know about how this piece was recorded. Now this gentleman is not only an internationally known jazz artist, but he's also a professor at Juilliard. It was clear Quentin posted this voluntarily. This was not a school assignment. This was not something that was required. This was not something that somebody else vetted. He decided this work was of enough quality to share in the public. He didn't do that early on, but he did it as he progressed, and he decided that it was time to do this. So it was not, we are all going to blog and share this information. It was his choice to decide, I am ready to step up and participate at this level. So what does that mean? Going back to the bad Shakespeare pun. What we've discovered in terms of learning is it is exceedingly important for it to be personal, and that it is not about creating learning content, and it is not about creating personalized goals for each student where you decide what their goals is, but it really is about creating spaces and creating these opportunities. And so when you open this up, and when you empower kids to do this kind of learning, you wind up with results that you would never expect, you cannot predict, you cannot put in a standardized chart of benchmarks. And yet you can have these really, really human opportunities. And I think until I see more of that conversation, which is why I was brought in here today, I am going to remain a dissident learner parent.